So these are the don'ts when you mulch. So here we go. This is called volcano mulching, and now you know why they call it volcano mulching, because it looks like a little volcano around the tree. Not good for the tree trunk, because again, the tree trunk is not meant to be underground. It does not live underground. The cells don't differentiate into root cells. They're trunk cells, and they like to have air. They don't like moisture. So you're trapping moisture up against the trunk of the tree. Here's where you need the mulch, out here where the feeder roots are, to feed the tree out here. Here's another good one. Looks like a beaver dam in the, and this is honestly a back east thing. I don't know why they do it back there, but every picture is from like Pennsylvania, Ohio, and thank goodness it didn't come across the Rockies. Maybe that's what they couldn't haul the mulch over yet or something, I don't know. But it hasn't caught on, and hopefully it won't. Here's the other mulches. This is a brand new installation. This is all rock. Looks nice, it's pretty, it's not doing anything for those trees. So the first thing they're gonna do is they're gonna blow all that out, like you had mentioned. They're gonna, blow all the leaves out, all the nutrients that tree is, built up over the summer, and then this tree is not gonna have any organic matter at all.
One of the handouts says about mulching, no compost, which seems to be in contradiction to what you're just saying now.
Okay, her question was compost as a mulch, don't use it. That is actually correct, because compost is already broken down. If you are converting your lawn, I would suggest putting an inch to 2 inch layer of compost down, because that's going to start the organic matter process. Put a couple of inches, 3 to 4 on top of that, and then you're going to kickstart your soil. If you just put compost over it, it's going to break down, it's already broken down. The thing about mulch is it takes time to break that down, and it creates that blanket. Compost has already gone through that process. So that's something we want to till into our soil and build up the organic matter in the soil rather than use as a mulch. Okay. And if you want to drought-proof your lawn, spring and summer, lay down a 1/2 inch compost, water it in, and you're going to feed that soil. Again, you're going to build that organic matter. You're going to build that. The lawn roots will be longer. They'll have deeper roots. They'll be able to store more water. And if you want to keep your nice green lawn, that's a great way to use it instead of using the regular old nitrogen fertilizer. Because compost is a slow release fertilizer. It automatically only gives up 10% of its nutrients every year. And so you can keep that going if you want to use that for, yes?
Can I use pine needles as compost? As mulch, or are they too acidic for?
No, Davis would be great. Pine needles are great because our soils and water are very high alkaline. So they will acidify your soil. Pine needles are really good. Pine straw. Be careful where you get it from. I would get it locally.
My own trees.
There you go. See, you don't even have to buy it. And I say that because there is a disease called pitch canker that it gets transmitted on the needles, and they found down in the Monterey area, they think that's a possible way that it got introduced from people buying pine straw from Georgia and shipping it in. There's a question back here. The question was, do you have to put water on the mulch? No, you do not have to put water on the mulch, because it's going to automatically break down underneath. Because what's going to happen is the soil microorganisms are going to start building up, they're going to start breaking that down, and they're going to create that composting process. That's going to create heat, which will create condensation, which will create its own moisture. So I mentioned pruning. How does pruning help with drought? Well, it's going to remove what we call the 3 Ds, the dead, damaged, and diseased wood, so the tree can not have to worry about that. The tree with dead wood in it, it takes time for that tree to seal over those wounds or seal out of those. Any diseased wood, the tree's going to not have to use up resources fighting that disease if we can prune that out. And obviously if there's any damaged wood in there, it's not good anyway, and the tree's not going to have, and we make proper cuts on the trees, and it seals over nice and quick. And I say seal because trees do not heal. Trees compartmentalize their wounds. You and I get a cut, we regenerate skin. Trees chemically wall off their wounds. And so if you have somebody come say, hey, I can put something on there to heal that tree, find another arborist because trees do not heal themselves. Pruning will establish a central leader if it hasn't already. That will create a stronger tree. In the last probably 7 to 8 years, there's been new research done that trees with a central leader are actually stronger, and they're really starting to take a look at biomechanics of trees and how they become stronger. So we create central leaders, we create shorter, fatter branches, and they're actually healthier, stronger trees. And that's coming out of the University of Florida. We can raise them up as needed, so we don't have DWR pruning our trees for us, which happens occasionally. And we do not ever want to top your tree unless there's something extremely catastrophic that happened to it and you have to restore the canopy. So if you look up in the phone book under an arborist and they say tree topping, again, move past that guy's ad and move on to the next guy. Because topping trees is extremely bad for them. And like I said, unless we have a storm and something catastrophic happens to that tree, you have to make a heading cut and want to save it and have the time and resources to restore that canopy, go ahead and do it. But as a general practice, it is not good.
What is topping?
Topping, well, I'll show you. I got some good examples of topping. So pruning, this is that tree that I showed you earlier, a nice strong central leader. So even trees that have a rounded canopy can be trained as a central leader. So plain trees automatically have one, but they'll get a kind of a wild limb out here. You want to keep that suppressed underneath there. And so that way those limbs don't get too long. That central leader suppresses their growth, it makes them shorter and stronger. And here's kind of a good example. So we go up, we got a central leader. Might have to do some pruning on this guy, but it's got this nice central leader look to it, and that's natural. So we want to just suppress these branches, shorten them, and then the attachments where the branches are stronger, and the branches are actually stronger, so you're reducing the risk of limb failures there. And that's the kind of pruning that we do on our street trees as much as possible. And the research shows that that's the way to do it. If you want to look up Ed Gilman out of the University of Florida, he has some great videos on his website. This research was done with the largest portable wind tunnel in the United States. He borrowed it from the University of Florida Engineering Department, and I forget how many twin turbo diesel engines run this thing, but they were blowing hurricane force winds on these trees that they pruned. So 120 mile an hour winds, if you want to see that, it's pretty cool. Blowing trees around that they pruned, and it's pretty dramatic. They did 3 different pruning basically specs on them, and it's amazing what the structural pruning does for the trees. So pruning, again, you do not want to top your trees. Please don't top your trees. You don't want to leave current or future defects. So if you have a tree that has very tight crotch angles to them, you want to reduce that so that either that or take it out. Codominant leaders, trees that have 2 tops, you either want to take one out or suppress it. There's a question.
With respect to topping, what about fruit trees? Can you keep them small?
Yeah, the question was about fruit trees, and fruit trees are pruned completely different than ornamental trees. So keeping them low, that's fine, because most people want to be able to reach the fruit. They're doing it year over year. Topping usually is done once, and then the next guy that somebody hires, they got a taller ladder, and then they top them again, or they got a shorter ladder. And so, yeah, fruit trees are a completely different classification of pruning, so that it's okay to do that.
Is he also asking about drop crotching, crown reduction on ornamental fruit trees, for example, as opposed to just chopping off?
Right. So the question was about drop crotch pruning, which is an actual practice of cutting a leader back to a smaller branch that will take over that leader, and I'll show you kind of the difference there. And that is an accepted practice. It's I got some visuals for you, and you'll be able to tell the difference.
I have a sequoia tree. It's a close glass of garden that doesn't still busy. What should I do with that? Just let it.
Just keep pruning it back. It's probably anthracnose, the leaf disease, and the sycamores and plane trees get it, and it's a difficult disease. They'll defoliate, And it basically creates stress on the tree because it'll defoliate the tree. They got to refoliate. It defoliates, it foliates, and probably it might be a little stressed. So like I showed that picture earlier. Yeah. Yeah. And so that tree's just losing that limb. It's saying, I'm going to stop putting resources into that, move them someplace else. If you have somebody come in and prune the dead wood out, that's great. Yep. 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 So if you have a continual, the question was about continual leaders die back or small leaders if they continue to die back. That's part of the 3 Ds of pruning. Prune out any dead wood in your tree, and the tree will respond. So topping. This is topping. So this little twig will not be able to sustain this big wood. And this is a institution that shall remain nameless did this in town. And so that is not corrective pruning or any kind of accepted pruning. That is topping. They just left the stubs. This may be a drop crotch or could considered that. Probably not, but it could. And if something happened to that tree, that would be an acceptable cut. The rule is don't cut anything back that's a 1.5 size. You cut back to a 1.5 size smaller than the leader. And then, because this branch will probably be able to sustain that leader. This, not so much. So that's kind of what they look like. You know, this has nothing on it. That's just gonna witch's broom out. All those shoots that come out of there aren't properly connected to the tree, so as they let these sprouts grow, they're going to be more apt to fall or crack. So what trees do normally is the trunk grows, stops during the spring, the branch grows, and so they interlock around one another. And if you've ever seen a picture of a weathered tree stump, it'll have, or a tree branch, it'll have a layer of trunk, it'll have a layer of branch, it'll have a layer of trunk, it'll have a layer of branch, and that's how branches gain their strength. And so if you try and pull that branch off, you can't do it. When branches come out of here, they're just what's called latent buds, and they just pop out of the tree, and it's like a shoulder socket, and you can just rip those right off super easy. So that's why we don't top trees, and that's why if you do have something happen and you have to top a tree, to continue to do a crown restoration probably for 5 to 7 years to maintain those trees and have it properly done. So that's topping. This is topping. You know, we had to take that tree out because somebody thought they knew how to prune trees better than we did, and they did this to it. So, you know, this tree is already stressed. If you do that now, that tree is going to die because it's going to, you know, put all its energy into pushing new growth because leaves are what feed the tree. Those are the stomach of the tree. If it doesn't have any leaves, it's got to use resources and reserves to put those leaves back on to start feeding itself again.
Is that a company out of like Watsonville or Monterey?
I don't know who did that. Could be. But I don't know. What we don't want to do is also excessively thin the trees. So we don't want and a little puff of branch. That's called lion's tailing. It's what the industry thought looked nice 20 years ago. It was called lacing a tree out, and it's not good. So what they found is those interior branches will dampen the wind effect, and actually these branches are more apt to break. What we thought previously was that the wind would blow through that tree and it wouldn't fail. We're finding now through the research that Ed Gilman's doing is that trees use those inner branches to dampen the dynamic effect of wind because branches blow all over the place. They don't just kind of go up and down or back and forth with the wind. And so those interior branches lessen that effect and distribute it throughout the tree. So this we don't want to do. Yeah.
Sorry. On that last picture, it looked like there was a tree to the right that was in a really cement.
Yes.
I always wonder how they survive.
That's a good question. She's wondering how this tree survives. And this is actually an old sewer pipe turned on end used as a planter. So they must have had some extra pipe when they got done with the parking lot and whatever and said, hey, let's plant a tree. I don't know. I mean, that's a survivor. That's a drought-proof tree because it's still there. I mean, trees are, yeah. It won't damage the tree, but it continues to grow out and needs corrective pruning, and that's something that they just will not do. So, yeah, the PG&E, they're getting better. Slowly, they're catching on. Some cities are better. We asked them to cut the trees back a little bit. They work with me pretty well in town. I try to tell them what to do. They do actually have a good vegetative management system in town, but you know their main focus is getting those lines cleared, and those restrictions keep getting tighter and tighter and tighter, and they have to prune more and more. And now they're looking at just taking trees out because on lines that are deemed major distribution or transmission lines, they cannot have an outage on those lines due to trees, or they get fined in the upwards of tens of millions of dollars by the feds. So it's a kind of a tough situation.
If your tree has been laced like that, how do you correct it? Should you just let it go in as it grows?
Yeah, so the question is, what do you do if you've had somebody come in and do this, or you bought a place that had that done? Yeah, the tree will naturally fill itself in, selectively keep some leaders in there, and leave them in there. So it's basically a reverse crown restoration. It'll get bushy because when you do this, the tree will put that foliage back on. And I don't have the slide set, but I've seen a slide set, a couple presentations when the structural pruning guys come through. Brian Kempf out of Visalia. He knew of a tree guy, a really good tree guy, did a really good job on a cork oak on his neighbor. I think the neighbor spent $1,200 or $1,500. It was a very large cork oak, laced it out like this. Brian took time-lapse pictures every 3 months, and within 12 months, the tree looked exactly the same as it was a year before. And he's like, you know, if you got the money to spend on a year on your tree, go ahead, but if you just structurally prune it, leave all that in there, the tree will do just fine. So I mentioned removing any future or current defects. If you can catch them when they're small, it's better. So we planted this tree this is Marden in East Davis, over in El Macero neighborhood. We planted this tree and I noticed it had a codominant stem. So this wanted to be another leader way out here. And I'm like, well, it's small, let's lop it off. It looked a little drastic. It left us a fairly big wound for a small tree, but it's better than taking a 6-inch limb off or an 8-inch limb off. So I went back today, took a picture of the tree because I thought it'd be fun to see what it looked like. Here's that big old wound on that little tree. It's already completely sealed over 5 years later. And this is what the tree looks like. So we got a nice strong central leader, it's filled in. You won't even know that that's there. When they cut the tree down, that'll be probably a little pie about that big inside that tree, because there'll be a little compartment in there where that tree has sealed over that wound and it's fine. And I won't have to be called out in the middle of the night in 12 years when that leader over the street falls off, because I took care of it early. And that's a perfectly fine wound for the tree. So if you can get them when they're small and you structure prune them, the defects are really good to get them out, and it doesn't hurt the tree. Sometimes when I prune trees with volunteer groups, they kind of look at me funny because I go through and I take care of all the defects, and they're like, what is that guy doing to the tree? So why do we do all of this? Why do we water our tree properly? Why do we structure prune them? Why do we put mulch? Well, we like trees around. So we do this for proper structure of the trees so that they grow right, so that we're safe. There is risk living in an urban forest. We have healthier trees that provide all those benefits that I talked about earlier. And it reduces the risk of living in a large canopy tree or under them. So this is why we do it, because we have a city that looks like this. Not all cities look like this or take care of their trees like the citizens have demanded of the people in Davis. And it's been since the 50s and 60s that the citizens of Davis have demanded this and want this, and it's a good thing. I get compliments when we have arborist conferences and workshops all the time of, wow, you guys' trees look really good. It's because we take care of them. So we have, we have large street trees. We retain large street trees. We put up with large street trees. But 5th Street's shaded constantly in the summertime. This street, if we don't realign it again, will last 30% longer when it's shaded, because the binders in asphalt will volatilize when they're in sun. So when they get shaded, those binders stay around a little bit longer. And if you look at the paving budgets in public works, if you can make that budget go 30% longer, maybe they'll give me a couple $1,000s to take care of the trees. We have parking lots that look like this instead of this. And this is adjacent to that other tree with this is actually a grocery outlet. And this is probably one of the better shaded parking lots in town, aside from the next door one where they don't have any trees at all. That's a good contrast. We have, aesthetic benefits for your neighborhood. If you got somebody coming new in town and your house is for sale right here and they come up and drive up and look at that, sold. We have a nice downtown so people can park. They're shaded. They will stay there longer if they can. And eat more, shop more, and do all those things. And we've gone through here. This is G Street, and what we've done is we've gone through and raised these up over time. So we get the canopies up above the business signs, up above the canopies, so people can see the canopies. Underneath it, they can see the signs rather than come in and top them and have a big hedgerow right at sign level. So if you own a business downtown, please be patient with me. I try to maintain the trees above your signs. Here's the opposite looking the other way. This is what we don't want. No, because we do it over time. This has been done over 3 or 4 years, so we don't do it all at once. But we will maintain this look, and this is a good, crown to shoot ratio, so that's pretty decent. Why we do this? We try to keep these trees from doing this. So this is a very bad defect. We try and prune this off. We try to do that so we have healthier trees to prevent this, because this is what the pear trees do. They have all of their holding wood right there. There's no holding wood for any of those leaders, and they just bust out. And we try to prevent that. So we reduce the risk. Can we do it all the time? No. But for the most part, we do a pretty good job of keeping the trees in the air. And if we don't plant any more pear trees, we won't have this happen. Here's your, volcano mulched mature tree. It's rotted because the stem tissues aren't meant to be underground. And this is what we want. So if you have any questions, I'll be happy to take questions. We got about 20 minutes before. So I will go right here.
Yeah, I just have a question about bark. So if the bark starts to split on a tree, is that a sign of, stress?
So the question is, if bark starts to split on the tree, is it a sign of stress? It depends on, this is going to be my answer a lot, depends on the type of tree and depends on the type of split. The Mayten tree, because there's a thing called a growth crack, so as trees get bigger, the bark will split. If you can see wood in the split, that's not a good thing. If you can see new bark underneath that split, then the tree's growing and just getting growth cracks. I don't know if I have any pictures of that or not. Might be able to find a growth crack, but probably not. Probably not. So like this thin-skinned trees, your Maytens, your locusts, maples, they will growth crack. There'll be splits in the trunk, but it's because the tree's growing. Like I said, if you can see wood, you can stick something into the tree, that's not a good thing. You probably want to get it looked at. Right here.
So for obvious reasons, you can't tell me exactly what I need to know, because everything depends on the type of tree and the type of soil. So my question is there a good resource for finding out which trees need what? I've found a couple of lists that don't have redwood and linden on them, so, and how do I find out about my soil?
The U.S. Geological Survey will have soil type maps. Generally in Davis, downtown has really good clay or sandy loam because that's where Puda Creek used to be. Anywhere else is going to be ag land, and it's probably clay, some sort of clay, heavy clay. And really a general rule of thumb, if you can give your tree 20 to 40 gallons a week, every other week, that's probably going to be adequate. With the new website up and running, if you go to the Urban Forestry Program, there is an Other Resources page, and there are a number of websites there, from Arborist to Tree Davis to the Arboretum to the Center for Urban Forest Research. There's a plethora of information there now, and it's easy to get to. So just go to the main page, go to Programs, Urban Forestry's right there, and it's the Other Resources.
Thank you.
Yep, back there.
You mentioned that trees are losing leaves, not to worry. My valley oaks in the back are just, they're dropping leaves like crazy.
Yeah, that should be okay. Also with the valley oaks or oaks, they get gall wasps. So those are the little things, if you've noticed in the green belts or under the valley oaks, it looks like popcorn jumping around. Those are all the larvae, or it looks like there's little Hershey Kisses on your tree, or other kinds of structures on the leaves. Those are called gall wasps, and they will actually have the larvae eat the leaves, it'll defoliate. But if the trees is defoliating, that's okay. You can also have somebody go out and take a look at it.
The leaves are staying on and they're getting, I've got Japanese maple.
Uh-huh.
And the leaves are just turning brown on the edge.
That's from the boron in our water, and Japanese maples, red maples, the plane trees, all about this time when they've gotten enough well water, they just start turning brown. It's the boron in the water that turns those leaves brown. The elms will do it as well. It's just with the high alkaline water and no leaching and our clay, the salts build up in our soil real quick. So I need to go over here.
I have drip lines, and I have problems with the emitters once in a while clogging and so on. So the question is, should I have the mulch on top of the drip line, and then I don't know what's going properly, or should I have the drip line on top of the mulch?
You can have the drip line on top of the mulch because it'll filter through the mulch. Yeah. Yeah, and that's good, like you said. Then you don't have to dig up all your emitters to check them because they will calcify pretty quickly in town.
I wondered what happened on Russell Boulevard, that we had to take out so many trees.
Russell Boulevard with the walnut trees, there is a whole dynamic going on out there. There is a disease that has come into California called canker disease on the black walnuts, and it's transmitted by a twig beetle.
The trees on Russell.
Which one? Yes, on the west part of town. The question is about why we're taking so many trees out along the Russell Boulevard, the black walnuts on the west of town. And they started dying off due to what's called cankers disease. And it's, like I said, the fungal spores are transmitted by a twig beetle. So as soon as the twig beetle enters the tree, it creates a canker and those trees are dying off. There is no cure for it. So with the drought, a lot of trees are dying and we're having to cut them out. We're leaving some of the stumps to have them resprout. There's a couple of volunteers with Tree Davis that are actually pruning some of those sprouts, and we're trying to pull new leaders. Where we've taken the stumps out, we're probably going to start replanting with valley oaks. Because they are historic and understand the significance of those walnuts, but they get mistletoe with the cankers disease. We're toying with the idea of just replanting a species that, one, doesn't get mistletoe, two, will live longer and is pretty disease and drought resistant. So that's what's there. I'm gonna have to go back.
I have a cedar.
So the question is, she has a cedar in her backyard and it's slanting a bit. Should she be worried about it? If all the growth is towards the slant and it looks abnormal, you might want to have it looked at. If you look at the tree from the way back and the tree slants and the growth is upward, it's probably done that over time, depending on the wind. There might be another tree by it that has grown away from and will correct itself.
It's huge. But
Yeah.
I think most of the growth is upward.
Yeah, it might have been the wind or something when it was young, and it's going to recorrect itself. Another thing to look for is if there's any cracking or really soft spots at the base, then that'll show uprooting. But if you go back as far as you can look and see the canopy, and you see the tree leaning, but the growth's upright, then it's fine. It's done that, so it should be fine. There was a question over here.
Impervious surfaces, concrete, board, asphalt, all that. What about replacing that, since we're on the topic of watering, replacing that with some material that would percolate through there?
The question is about impervious surfaces and replacing them with maybe pavers or something. That's a great idea. If you can do it, that's great. A lot of new developments, we're speccing pervious concrete, pervious pavers, structural soils underneath the trees, underneath the parking spaces, just for that reason. So that's a good idea.
So hopefully this is pertinent to more than enough. How big is this tree?
So the question is, she has a mature hackberry. It's in a, say, 20 by 20 lawn area surrounded by concrete, which is probably a pretty normal urban tree. How much to water it? I would say probably twice a month. You'd probably want to water it with a soaker hose. If you got a soaker hose, that's great. And again, overnight, soak it, slow drip, and that should be good. The hackberries, if you have a European hackberry, they're a little more drought tolerant than the Chinese hackberry. The European hackberries are a little more blue. There's a few more in town, but the Chinese hackberries are kind of need a little more water end. And so I would say twice a month through the summer or until it ever rains again, would be my guess.
My pine tree is dropping pine cones when they're still green and hard. Is that a sign of water stress?
No, that's a sign you have squirrels eating your pine cones. So the question was, she's got a pine tree with pine cones that are dropping when they're green. No, the squirrels like to eat the pine nuts and they chew them off and they drop them. Also, they like the Zocova seeds. So if you have a Zocova and it's dropping little bits of branches, check the ends of either the pine cones or the branches and you'll see a little chew mark.
They'll do that to hackberries.
They do that to hackberries too. So the question was an English walnut with other shrubs underneath it. The English walnut should be fine because it'll take some more water underneath it. Again, that matches up with the pittosporum. Those are compatible plants. If you said I had a valley oak with, my irises underneath it, it might be a different story, but the English walnut will take a little more water because it is they'll take more water.
So what you described for the hackberry, about the same for a 35-year-old redwood?
Probably maybe want to do that once a week. Because redwoods, you got to remember where redwoods come from. They like 60 to 100 inches of rain a year. We get 19, if that. So they need a little more water. Unless you can get them mulched and water that, I would say, then you could get to the once and twice a month. But if you water it once or twice a month, you might want to give it a little more water. You probably want to get one of those water probes. And then that way you can hook the hose up to it, push it into the soil, leave it for like half an hour a spot, and do that in 3 or 4 spots mid-canopy. And then that way you don't have to worry about it draining down, and that probe will put the water right where the roots are and kind of blast the water around in there. So I would suggest getting a little water probe. And there's timers that you can get that you can put on your hose. You can just set the timer, kind of like the Ronco, set it and forget it, and you're good to go. Yeah, yeah.
When you have these clay soils, how far down do you have to go to check the water, how saturated it is so that the roots don't rot?
You want to go probably in the good 8 to 10 inch range. If you can get a foot down, that would be good. The clay soils, anything past probably 2 feet, there's probably not going to be any roots down there anyway because there's no air. So I would say the top 12 inches. So the question was how far down to go to check your soil moisture in the clay soils, and I would say 8 to 12 inches.
Is it
good?
true of all trees? With big taproots, they must go further.
Yep.
What about palm trees?
Palm trees are more fibrous roots, so they won't. But yes, depends on in any kind of clay soil, any tree where there's no oxygen, there's not going to be any roots, unless it's a bald cypress or some kind of swamp tree where they'll put the knees up and are adapted to that. But there's the function is there air and water? If there's no air and it's gone anaerobic or there's too much water, you're not going to get root growth. So, and go ahead.
How do you check 12 inches down in your soil, in your dirt?
You can get a soil probe. They have little probes that are hollow. You can go down. You can get a little garden trowel, dig a little hole, that type of thing. Yeah, do it in the wintertime. It's easier to.
Would you change your schedule any for fruit trees?
That's a tough one. I probably depends on how much fruit you want, really. If you don't want too much fruit and you can cut back the water, you're probably not going to get much fruit, but you keep your tree alive. If you want fruit production, you're going to have to give it more water. I would say probably water them once a week. If you want to keep them, sustain them more than that, then you'd have probably proper fruit production. But fruit trees are kind of a different breed. If you want to just keep them alive and can suffer through not having fruit, you could cut back on the water once a week. If not, you're going to need to give them more water. Fruit trees can be mulched. You can also do a cover crop under them if you want to do that. A lot of growers will use clover because it'll put nitrogen in the soil as well. So you can do a little cover crop underneath them if you want, other than lawn and Bermuda. There you go. She said faba beans. Is that what she said? Yeah. You can have Hannibal Lecter over. 40-year-old ginkgo tree. Again, once or twice a month would be, I would look for all these symptoms. If you're watering your tree and you're not seeing any drought symptoms, stay on that schedule. If you've cut back and the tree's doing good, keep on that schedule. Really just take a look at the tree. If it's showing any of those signs of drought stress, cut back a little bit and check the soil moisture, because if you're watering a lot, you might be watering too much. Because trees will look the same if they're in saturated soils and going anaerobic. They'll dry up, they'll look like they need water, and you're going to water them more, and then it's going to pop out of the ground. Back there.
So if I change my watering schedule, how long do I need to wait until I know the tree does have drought stress?
I would say probably about a month after you've changed it, it'll start showing. It should. If it's adapting to it, it obviously won't show any signs, but I would give it a good month to check on it. Hopefully we'll be in some rain by then, but next summer if it comes up or it doesn't, I'd give it a good month. Well, don't feel guilty about watering your trees, because it's only going to increase your bill about $5 to $10 a month, if that. Yes. Yeah.
That's another thing. The water that we pay for, the bill that I got today, is water.
So Alan's, he's volunteering to tell you how much to water your trees back there? No, I'm just kidding. So Alan said he has measured that if it takes less than a minute to fill, over a minute to fill a cup of water, and you leave that trickle on overnight, that's 40 gallons of water. And that's probably, if you do that twice a month, your trees will probably be happy. I'll take one more question.
I realize there's species what trees tend to use versus what lawns tend to use? For example, in my neighborhood, we're going on the sort of 50% rule compared to what lawns used to use. We've cut our watering back about 50%, and most of our trees are doing pretty well on that.
Yeah, typically lawns will use more water because they have shorter roots and no capacity to store it. So they use a lot more water because their root zone is drying out faster because they're in the top 3 to 6 inches of soil. That's drying out. We got to replenish that. They're using that water on a daily basis. So trees don't use quite that much water. They mainly transpire a lot of their water, and so they're using less of it. And also they can store it, especially the drought-tolerant species. They have special structures within them that look like straws that they store water in. And if you've ever cut like a eucalyptus down, if you've cut a valley oak down, the bigger ones, they will drain water out of them. As you cut them, the water literally drains out of them. So anyway, I think we're out of time because it's 8 o'clock. Thank you for coming. My card's over here. If you have any questions, email me. That's probably the easiest way to get a hold of me. Again, thank you for coming. We appreciate your time.